it's Sue Stockdale. Welcome to the preview of Series 3 of Access to Inspiration podcast, the podcast where you can learn from people who may be unlike you. This series is even more geographically diverse than the first two series, with guests from Germany, Greenland and Hong Kong, as well as other amazing individuals talking about their work in New Zealand, Venezuela and England. Before I dive in and tell you what we have coming up over the next 8 episodes, I'd like to let you know about the impact that the podcast series is having and the feedback we are getting from our listeners. When we started this podcast at the end of 2019, we wanted each episode to have a positive impact on you, our listeners, and that you would be inspired to do something differently or reflect on your own situation with some new perspective from what you discovered in the interviews. So we asked you, and several of you gave us your feedback. Thank you. I spoke to 2 listeners in particular to hear in their own words how it has impacted them. Firstly, Evelyn from the Netherlands, who particularly enjoyed the conversation with John David Bartow, the astronaut.
So I've been thinking about it because there were a lot of little bits of inspiration that I got from the podcast. I loved where he talked about dinner tables when he was growing up, and how when there was a question, someone would run and grab the encyclopedia and they would all figure it out as a family. And I just loved that sense of curiosity and that sense of family, like bringing those two things together. And I thought, I want to use that more. So I've been trying to incorporate that also in my homeschooling, but also even at like dinner table conversations. I have a 4.5-year-old. She's constantly curious about life, but there are so many things that my answer to her is, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. To then not just stay there, but actually like, okay, let's figure this out together. And it's brought like a whole new energy also into our learning and growing together, which is really, really neat. I think a lot of things were unexpected. To be honest, like I'd never really even considered what kind of people go into becoming an astronaut, what kind of people choose that as a career or as a profession. I loved how he said, I think you asked him at some point, like, does anybody fail or does anyone sort of drop out of the pre-program? And he said, well, over the course of all the time that he's been there, only one person has ever dropped out. So I don't know, it just felt like it was just interesting. It was so interesting to hear him say how he went from being young and wanting to be either a cowboy or an astronaut and then choosing this profession that was so about adventure and just the whole storyline. It just took me into not only his life, but also thinking about how all of us have our stories of how this sort of winds and how we end up choosing a particular profession and how little I really know about all these different professions that are out there and the people that are making the choices to go into them. And yeah, so I think the whole journey was like a big, wonderful surprise.
And then I spoke to Mike from the UK, who was moved also by what the astronaut had to say, and also an earlier interview with Celia Garland from Series 1, whose career journey resonated particularly with him.
I was struck in a case by the serendipitous nature of careers, or lots of the careers I've been involved with. The fact that, again, it's not training as something and then working your way up through a hierarchy. That actually she seized opportunities as they came along. It was the sort of classic brilliant exploitation of the lucky break. And similarly with the astronaut on the more recent series, that actually he'd been a scientist, had been working away in that round. Suddenly an opportunity to go into space comes along, and wow, that opened up all sorts of possibilities for him. In terms of what it made me do differently, I think one minor thing that did arise was a few years ago I was working away from home. I wrote a comedy screenplay, which I then submitted to the BBC, didn't go anywhere, and it just kind of lay dormant. I was quite happy I'd done it, learned a lot in the process. Actually listening to, I forget which one of the Access to Inspiration podcasts it was, made me think I ought to do something more with it. So I did since sent it to a friend of mine who's a writer, and she gave me some very useful feedback. And yeah, so that was one of the specifics that it triggered in me. So something more concrete that came out of it, the astronaut guy, the notion of acting on specific simulations, which obviously is essential in the sort of area he's been involved with. One of the companies I now chair runs hospitals. I thought we ought to be doing some more active simulation. So I think those are things that come to me as I've been listening to the podcast, which I find hugely enjoyable.
It's very motivating for us to hear these examples of how the podcasts are having a positive impact. But it's not just the listeners who are learning. For 60% of our guests, so far this is the first podcast that they have ever done. So we're introducing them to a new communication medium and helping them find a way to share their stories, which we are very proud of. We're also trying to improve our service to you. And if you haven't checked it out yet, on our website, accesstoinspiration.org, you'll find transcriptions for all the Series 2 podcasts, and the others will be getting added soon. So on to Series 3. We will kick off the series talking to Sarah Lang, who is transforming the infrastructure sector in New Zealand in order to make it more representative of the world we live in today, and more appealing to a diverse range of talented people. Sarah's work reminded me of the Dalai Lama quote, "If you think you are too small to make a difference, try sleeping with a mosquito."
I'm very staunch about only working in areas where I can make a difference and leaving a positive legacy. And so I think the infrastructure sector is a great way to do that. Infrastructure is not just concrete and bridges. Actually, infrastructure is built to improve the well-being of our people, and I'm very passionate about that.
Then there is Virginie Goethais, whose love of running was the impetus for her to set up a charity in Hong Kong that provides sports as a rehabilitation tool for particularly vulnerable refugees and asylum seekers. All you need is a pair of shoes in the outdoors, she says. I think you might also need some energy.
When you exercise, even very mild exercise, your cortisol levels, that's your stress hormone levels, they go down. Refugees face a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression, a lot of PTSD, and very simple exercise. Just spending some time in nature really helps to get them in a happy place.
And if that isn't enough to whet your appetite, one of the conversations I'll be having is with Nauja Bianco about what it's like to grow up in Greenland, where a love of the outdoors and acceptance of responsibility comes at an early age. It's also a part of the world where cultural identity is becoming more important. So listen to what Nauja has to say on that. All this and lots more to enjoy in the next few weeks. Remember, if you're enjoying the series, please take a moment to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or tell your friends about us so they can subscribe too. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter and LinkedIn. Just search for Access to Inspiration. 25 minutes of inspiration brought to your device every week. I look forward to connecting with you soon.